Young Hawk, an Iroquois scout, gives a powerful first-hand description of the shocking events of Custer's final stand, also referred to as the Battle of Little Bighorn. This pivotal period in American history has been shrouded in mystery and controversy for almost a century. For the first time, hear the pure truth from a Native American viewpoint. Young Hawk's horrific tale transports you to the gory battlefield where George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry Regiment met their terrible end. Get ready for an exciting and captivating journey into the heart of a major conflict. So relax, choose up a seat, and let's begin this thrilling journey. Remember to support our community by giving this video a like and following our channel. The army was assembled on a little knoll at the foot of the hill, and Custer's detachment came down from the high butte to join it. The scouts were rather uneasy, wondering how Custer would feel when he learned that the Dakotas knew he was coming. The scouts who had descended from the hill had told them about the 6 Dakotas. As Custer approached, the scouts began to form up according to their respective tribes, such as the Crows, Iroquois, etc. The Iroquois congregated around their elder males, who conversed with the younger ones, in accordance with the tribe's customs. Stab addressed the young men, and Custer conveyed his orders to the scouts through Fred Girard. He said, "Boys, please remove the horses from the Sioux camp." Then Stab encouraged the Iroquois scouts to do as Custer had instructed and attempt to seize as many horses as they could. Custer continued, "Make the decision to immediately approach their camp and take their horses. Boys, this is going to be a long day. You will gain invaluable experience today. Therefore, you need to bolster your nerves." When the scouts reached the top of the ridge, Girard informed them that the bugle sounded, signifying that the flag had been unfurled. This created a lot of excitement, and everyone prepared by tightening their girths and lowering their loads. Another bugle blast sounded, and Custer ordered the scouts to advance. When they were around halfway to the high ridge on the right, Young Hawk saw some scouts staring toward the lone teepee at the ridge's foot as they descended into the dry coulee. The scouts in his company halted as the others approached. They then heard Girard remark, "The chief orders you to charge," from behind them. Strikes 2 wrote back, "What are we doing?" and yelled a battle. At this point, we all gave battle whoops, and Strikes 2 was the first to reach the lone teepee and strike it with his whip. On the north side of the teepee, Young Hawk dismounted and proceeded to cut the tent from top to bottom with a knife he had taken from his belt. He noticed a deceased individual wearing a buffalo robe hanged on a scaffold. At the same time, Young Hawk noticed Red Star riding beside him. Before turning into the dry coulee beyond, the scouts all rushed around to the north side of the teepee, where they passed the white soldiers and rode on in a wild group. The more experienced horsemen kept up with the army, while some of the scouts fell behind. When they suddenly turned right after going through a prairie dog village at the mouth of a dry coulee, Young Hawk saw Red Bear, Goose, Boy Chief, and Red Star on the west side of the tiny Bighorn. In anticipation of being slaughtered and scalped by the Dakotas, Young Hawk unbraided his hair, tied it front with a few stray eagle feathers, and prepared for the worst. The fight started abruptly, with skirmishes starting in front of the line as the scouts and troops dismounted and arranged their horses in groups behind it. While the soldiers formed a line to the right, the scouts positioned themselves to the left near the crest, with a few scouts scattered far to the left on a slant. Farthest to the left and nearest to the peak were the bobtailed bulls. Dakota's skirmishers rode back and forth in front of the line. Young Hawk moved to the right to take his place as the scouts stood in the following order: Red Bear, Little Brave, Forked Horn, Red Foolish Bear, Goose, Big Belly, Crow, and Strike's adversary, Crow, are well behind the bob-tailed bull on the left flank. Young Hawk pulled Goose away from Big Belly. Behind them, Bloody Knife appeared on the small Bighorn and headed directly for me. I glanced up at his attire and saw the present from Custer: the unusual black handkerchief with blue stars and the bear's claw with clamshell. They were carrying out Custer's orders concerning the Sioux horses, Bloody Knife told me. The horses are being seized. Then he stood beside Little Brave, behind the line. As the fight intensified, our line leaned back into the river. Many soldiers were falling, and our forces began to retreat. Before being shot and killed, a Dakota warrior gallantly attacked and closed up on the soldiers about 16 feet from our line. He rode a sorrel horse with a hairless face and a scarlet fabric tied around its tail. After the warrior fell, the horse kept coming toward us, and I claimed it. I shouted for Red Bear to come and take the prisoner horse, but he never did. Instead, Big Belly, a Crow Indian, approached and declared, "Brother, I want this horse. Give it to me." Big Belly, also known as Half Yellow Face, was a friend of Young Hawk's. Letting go of his own terrible horse, he mounted the new Dakota. Meanwhile, behind the crest that Bobtailed Bull was next to, the Dakotas had begun gathering. Suddenly, a dense group of Dakotas appeared over the ridge and began to charge toward Bobtailed Bull in tandem. Meanwhile, a nearby white soldier turned to Young Hawk and said, "John, you go." The Dakota attack forced our line back into the soldiers, forcing us to cross the river and retreat some 2 miles downstream. We climbed diagonally up the cliff after crossing the flat, which was a difficult ascent. The soldiers led the withdrawal, with the scouts, Half Yellow Face, Strike's adversary, the 2 crows, Red Foolish Bear, Forked Horn, Goose, and Young Hawk following in their wake. When he reached the timber, Young Hawk heard Forked Horn shout, "Let's get off and stand." Bobtailed Bull's precarious position, falling back near the troops' fort while being closely pursued by the Dakotas, caused this. This was taken as a general signal for the scouts, and both Goose and Young Hawk leaped from their horses. When they fired at them without stopping their horses, the Dakotas turned around. Bobtailed Bull managed to cross the river at the troops' fort. Young Hawk was unable to fire again after dropping his shell while loading his carbine. The 4 scouts, Half Yellow Face, Strike's adversary, Red Foolish Bear, and Forked Horn, rode into the brush and crossed the river further downstream, less than 1/8 of a mile away. Goose and Young Hawk trailed behind, their horses struggling to reach the opposite bank through the deep water and dense vegetation. They sought refuge in a dense grove of trees and found the other 4 scouts who had ridden ahead without their knowledge. The Dakotas were shooting through the forest, closing down on the scouts who were crouched on horseback. As the 2 Young Hawks stood facing each other, Goose groaned, "Cousin, I am injured." As a young man, Hawk's will to persevere was cemented. Goose displayed his damaged right hand, and Young Hawk, standing next to the horse, snatched up his cartridge belt and placed it on. Bullets knocked Goose's horse down as he helped him off. Enraged, Young Hawk stripped off his army coat and shirt, ready to fight for his life. When he put Goose against a tree and instructed him to hold the horse, Half Yellow Face began crawling toward them. "They're killing my friend," Half Yellow Face remarked. "He's resting along the thicket's edge." Young Hawk crept with Strike, hands and feet, to reach the dead Crow Scout, Strike's enemy or White Swan, who lay on his back with his arms raised. Goose was sitting against a tree, and they dragged him with them to his location. "I'm glad to be hurt," Strike's opponent said. Young Hawk acknowledged. "I chose to die at the edge of the timber because I felt uncomfortable seeing my injured teammates, and I hated seeing them tortured." Before he left, he put his hand around his horse's neck and muttered, "I love you." He crawled out, stood up, and opened fire on the kneeling Sioux warriors. A volley struck him, but he survived. Determined to try again, he crawled out to a new location, fired, and drew another volley, vanishing before being hit. In order to avoid being shot, he found Forked Horn laying face down. He also discovered a tree nearby that had driftwood piled up against it, providing a safe refuge. Forked Horn saw that Young Hawk had twice drawn the Dakota's fire and cautioned him not to do it again. Making oneself a target is a poor idea. When the Dakotas attempted to burn them out, the grass was too green to burn. Young Hawk sat still for a bit before firing at a neighboring Dakota who was mounted on a gray horse. Because it was attached by a lariat, he jumped to his feet and fired again, killing him this time. When its rider fell, the horse, with its beautiful bridle and fine grooming, circled to the left. Young Hawk eventually killed the horse with 2 shots. As it collapsed, he let out the Arikura yell, a traditional cry used to signal the defeat of an adversary. Goose asked Young Hawk to fetch the fragile bridle for him after seeing the horse's death. Later, when the Sioux came closer, Young Hawk aimed and killed another warrior. Then he let out the howl of death. During this time, Dakota women rode up and shouted for their warriors to massacre the Arikura. They hurried away with the others, though their cries were audible over the bushes. Custer's attack had begun at the lower fort, as Young Hawk noticed the Dakotas riding downstream as the attack waned. They saw additional Dakotas riding north past them, crossing the river. Young Hawk stood up when the gunshots ceased and noticed a U.S. flag on the ridge above, indicating the pack train's location. Forked Horn received praise. "My grandson, you have proven to be the bravest little hawk. We now have to make an effort to reach the pack train as instructed by Custer so as not to be confused for Dakotas." Young Hawk created a temporary flag by tying his white handkerchief to a stick. They managed to put Strike's opponent on his own horse, even though he suffered injuries to his right hand and leg. Goose rode his horse while Red Foolish Bear kept walking. Young Hawk rode forward while waving the white flag. As they ascended the slope and descended the creek, they saw the Dakotas reappear on the east side of the ridge, rushing toward the white camp. When the Custer conflict ended, the Dakotas took control of the hill where the soldiers had made their final stand. The gang turned around, save for Young Hawk, who held his ground and waved the white flag. He was the target of the Dakotas, while the soldiers fired at the enemy above him. He jumped to his feet and ran inside with the flag in hand, but his horse was slain near the camp. He located his head of scouts, Varnum, Peaked Face, Little Bighorn combat survivors, Reno and Bentine's troops, the pack train, and the commander in charge, who gave him a relieved greeting. The officer pointed out that Bobtailed Bull, the sergeant, had fallen and that his horse was in camp. Young Hawk discovered Little Brave's spotted horse, took it, and claimed it as his own, assuming Little Brave had fallen. As the Dakotas approached, the other scouts trailed behind him, and the entire party retreated into a nearby ravine, As the Dakotas launched a fierce charge, the gunfire was deafening on both sides, and soldiers and horses were dying rapidly. After that, the Dakotas shifted to the right and shot into the gully from one end. The soldiers swiftly made breastworks out of cracker boxes, bacon packs, and other materials. With the cracker box serving as a makeshift shield, young Hawk lay on the ground. He was not involved in the breastworks' construction. The Dakotas surrounded them and began firing from all sides as their lines moved forward in a crouching position. It was impossible to hear anything else because of the volume of gunfire. The injured were dragged to the breastworks because it was believed to be the safest location. This intense battle continued unabated until dusk. As night fell, the wounded were cared for and the dead were put aside. The troops remained vigilant throughout the night in case the Dakota launched an attack. The ferocious battle that lasted until late afternoon began with a few rounds fired around daybreak. The scouts had regrouped on the side closest to the Dakota lines in the ridge. On the first afternoon, an officer came up to the scouts with a message that had to be delivered after dark. "All right, Forked Hornet sent it." Since Goose was unable to participate due to his injuries, the officer informed him that each scout would give the same message. Later, the officer came back with a sergeant, who said he would accompany them to ensure that, in the event that all of the scouts were killed, the situation in the camp would be known. Goose insisted on going despite his damaged hand because he wanted to share in the others' fate. The officer clarified that the message was meant for the President of the United States, who would use it to inform the world of what had occurred. They were let to ride government horses, which were faster than their own, and instructed to ride hard, ignoring anyone who may be shot by the Dakotas. In order for soldiers to find the message paper later and understand the situation, scouts were expected to leave it on the ground if they were wounded or hurt. Forked Horn requested that the government horses' shoes be removed because he believed they would perform better without them. The 2 Crow Scouts remained behind once the messages were prepared, one to care for the wounded scout. The messengers Goose, Forked Horn, Red Foolish Bear, Young Hawk, and the White Sergeant were ready to embark on their perilous journey. When night fell, they followed the ravine out, but they had to swiftly escape after the Dakotas ambushed them.